Growing up in my family gives you a certain sense of history. I'm simply the latest in a line that can be traced back generations. Over my grandmother's lifetime, the last 90 years or so,
something significant has shifted inside Buckingham Palace. And those who understand how the British monarchy truly operates, not through public announcements or carefully staged photographs, but through the quiet, deliberate movement of paperwork, precedent, and protocol, will recognize that what has just unfolded is not a minor family disagreement. It is not a momentary tension between a stepson and a stepmother finding their footing in an unusual domestic arrangement. What has happened is something far more consequential, far more calculated, and far more permanent than anything the palace has seen in recent memory. Prince William, the Prince of Wales and heir to the British throne, has made his move, and the palace has erupted in response. At the center of this storm is a name, or more precisely, the removal of a name. Laura Lopes, the daughter of Queen Camilla from her first marriage, reportedly found herself absent from the attendance arrangements for the Royal Maundy service, one of the oldest and most spiritually resonant ceremonies in the entire British royal calendar. To outsiders, the removal of a name from a guest list might seem like a minor administrative matter, the kind of quiet housekeeping that goes unnoticed outside the thick stone walls of royal residences. But to anyone who understands the language of the palace, a language spoken not in words, but in precedents, protocols, and the weight of written records, this single act carries the force of a constitutional statement. William did not whisper a preference into a courtier's ear. He did not send a polite suggestion through back channels. He put it in writing. And in the world of the British monarchy, when something is put in writing, it becomes institutional reality. To understand why this moment matters so profoundly, you have to understand the ceremony at the heart of it. The Royal Maundy service is not a modern invention. Its origins stretch back to the medieval period, rooted in the Christian tradition of the sovereign demonstrating humility before the people, echoing the act of Christ washing the feet of his disciples. For centuries, British monarchs have participated in this ritual, distributing specially minted Maundy coins to elderly citizens selected for their service to their communities and their churches. It is a ceremony that carries within it the very soul of what constitutional monarchy is supposed to represent, the idea that the crown exists not for the glorification of those who wear it, but in service to the nation and its people. The guest list for such an event is therefore not a social register. It is a statement of institutional values. Every name on that list is a declaration of who belongs within the innermost circle of the working crown. And that is precisely what makes William's decision so loaded with meaning. Laura Lopes has never been a working royal. She holds no title derived from her relationship to the crown. She carries out no official duties on behalf of the sovereign. She is, by the palace's own carefully maintained definitions, a private citizen, the daughter of the queen consort, connected to the royal family by the threads of personal relationship rather than constitutional obligation. Her increasing presence at high-profile royal occasions over the past several years had been noted by observers and tolerated by the household under the atmosphere of accommodation that characterized the later years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign and the opening chapter of King Charles III. But tolerance, as William appears to have decided, is not the same as entitlement. And entitlement, in his vision of the monarchy, has no place. The backstory to this decision is one that has been building for some time, layered with the complexity of a royal household navigating an extraordinary set of pressures simultaneously. King Charles III has been managing serious health challenges, and while the palace has maintained an official posture of cautious optimism, the reality within the institution is that the day-to-day operational weight of the monarchy has been gradually redistributing itself. William has stepped into that redistributed weight not reluctantly, not merely as a dutiful placeholder, but with the focused intentionality of a man who has spent his entire life preparing for a role and has decided that preparation is over. The time for action has arrived. Those who have observed the internal workings of the palace during this period describe a William who is operating with a clarity of purpose that is striking in its consistency. He has, according to multiple accounts from people familiar with the household's dynamics, developed a coherent philosophy about what the monarchy must be in the 21st century if it is, to survive and retain public confidence. That philosophy rests on a few core principles, each of them ruthlessly simple. First, the working royals framework must be absolute. Those who carry out duties carry access and privilege. Those who do not, regardless of their personal connections to those who do, exist in an entirely different category. Second, the ceremonial life of the crown belongs to the institution, not to the family. The royal monde de service, the state opening of parliament, the trooping the color. These are not family occasions with public dimensions. They are state occasions with family participants, and the distinction is not semantic. It is constitutional. Third, and perhaps most critically for the current moment, precedent shapes the future. A name allowed onto a ceremonial register this year becomes an expectation next year, and an assumption the year after that. William has watched the slow accumulation of these assumptions over the past decade and has decided that the moment to address them is now, while he still has the operational authority to act, and before those assumptions calcify into permanent fixtures of palace custom. Queen Camilla's reaction to the exclusion of her daughter has reportedly been intense. Those familiar with her response describe a woman who feels not merely inconvenienced, but genuinely wronged. Convinced that what has been done to Laura represents a deliberate act of marginalization directed not just at her daughter, but at herself. Camilla has spent years carefully building what might fairly be described as a legacy of rehabilitation. She entered public life under the most difficult possible circumstances, perceived by a significant portion of the British public as a figure associated with the breakdown of one of the most scrutinized marriages in modern history. The journey from that beginning to the role of queen consort and now queen has been a long and carefully managed one, requiring patience, discipline, and the cultivation of genuine goodwill. Part of that cultivation has involved the gradual normalization of her family within the royal orbit. Her children, Laura and Tom Parker Bowles, becoming familiar faces at royal events, seen as part of the extended fabric of the House of Windsor without ever being formally designated as members of it. That gradual normalization is now being directly confronted by William's actions, and Camilla reportedly understands with absolute clarity what is happening. This is not a bureaucratic oversight. This is not an administrative error that a conversation between family members can smooth over. This is a deliberate structural decision, communicated through formal channels, entered into the institutional record, and designed to establish a precedent that will outlast any individual's feelings about it. The Queen reportedly made her displeasure known through direct communication upward, meaning to the King himself. She put her case to Charles, framing the exclusion of Laura as a matter of personal dignity, of loyalty rewarded with humiliation, of a woman who has stood faithfully beside her husband through extraordinary circumstances, finding her family treated as unwelcome at the very ceremonies that her position as queen ought to make accessible to those she loves. Charles's response, according to those with knowledge of these private dynamics, was one of the most significant moments of this entire episode. He did not intervene. He heard his wife's case, and he allowed his son's decision to stand. This is not a trivial matter of domestic management. This is a reigning monarch choosing, in a moment of real personal and marital pressure, to prioritize the institutional judgment of his heir over the emotional appeal of his wife. Charles, whatever his personal feelings about the situation, has made a calculation that speaks to his understanding of the moment in which the monarchy finds itself. He knows that the institution needs William to succeed. He knows that the credibility of the working royals framework, the argument that the monarchy justifies its existence through service and duty rather than through privilege and proximity to power, depends on that framework being enforced consistently and without exceptions carved out for personal convenience. To have overruled William would have been to publicly undermine the very man on whom the future of the House of Windsor rests. Charles chose not to do that, and in choosing not to, he said more than any formal statement could. The response from Princess Anne has, by contrast, been one of quiet but unmistakable solidarity with her nephew's position, and has long been regarded as the royal family member who most embodies the philosophy that William is now implementing at an institutional level. She has carried out more public engagements than virtually any other member of the family across the span of her royal career, driven by a deep personal conviction that royal privilege is only legitimate when it is paid for by royal service. She has never shown much patience for the idea that proximity to the crown confers social benefits without the corresponding obligations of duty. Her reported endorsement of William's approach, framed in characteristically direct and unsentimental terms, reinforces the sense that what William is doing is not an act of personal aggression, but a principled application of standards that the most respected members of the royal family have always privately upheld. The contrast being drawn at the moment within palace circles between Laura Lopes and James, the young Earl of Wessex, is one that illuminates the logic of William's position with particular clarity. James is the son of Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, and Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh. He is the grandson of Queen Elizabeth II, a member of the royal bloodline, someone whose very existence is part of the dynastic continuity of the House of Windsor. When Sophie's illness prevented her from fulfilling certain engagements during the Easter season, James stepped in alongside his father, and this was seen not as an imposition or a breach of protocol, but as entirely natural. A young man of the blood stepping up to support his family's representation of the crown. Camilla reportedly pointed to this situation as evidence of a double standard, asking how the inclusion of James could be celebrated while the inclusion of Laura was prohibited. But this argument, in William's framework, represents exactly the confusion of categories that he is trying to eliminate. James is Windsor. Laura is Parker Bowles. The bloodline is the institution. Extended family by marriage, however personally beloved, is something categorically different. There is also a deeper strategic dimension to William's actions that deserves attention. He has not simply made a one-time decision about a single ceremony. He has built a precedent. In the world of institutional bureaucracy, and the British monarchy is, at its core, one of the most sophisticated institutional bureaucracies in the world, precedent is everything. Once a name has been formally struck from a register, once the reasoning for that removal has been entered into the administrative record, future decisions are made not from scratch, but in reference to that precedent. Any future attempt to restore Laura Lopes to the guest list for a comparable ceremony would not be a neutral act. It would be a reversal, a documented, traceable reversal that would require explicit justification and would carry the implicit message that the precedent William established had been overturned. That is a much higher barrier than simply not having established a precedent in the first place. William understands this. He has, in the language of institutional power, built a wall, and he has built it in a place where removing it will cost whoever attempts to do so considerable political and institutional capital. The wider court has been watching all of this with an alertness that the official calm of palace communications does not begin to capture. Staff members, courtiers, and officials across the various royal households are reading the signals being sent by William's actions and drawing their own conclusions about where the operational center of the monarchy currently sits. When a senior staff member needs to decide how to handle a request that involves access or attendance, they are now operating with a clear understanding of where the real authority lies. The Prince of Wales's office is not just the office of the future king. It is the office of the effective operational leadership of the monarchy in the present. That understanding shapes every calculation made within the household, and it is a shift that Camilla and her team have reportedly found difficult to fully absorb. The informal influence networks that had been painstakingly built over years are finding themselves bypassed by formal structures that simply do not respond to the softer instruments of court politics in the way they once did. What makes this moment genuinely historic rather than merely dramatic is the context of transition in which it is occurring. The British monarchy has undergone significant change in recent years. The death of Queen Elizabeth II removed the figure who had served for 7 decades as the ultimate arbiter of royal life, the person whose presence and authority provided the fixed point around which all other dynamics organize themselves. Charles's accession has been managed with considerable dignity, but his health challenges have introduced an uncertainty that the institution had not fully anticipated so early in his reign. Into that uncertainty, William has moved, not chaotically or opportunistically, but with the measured confidence of a man implementing a plan he has been developing for years. The Mundus service exclusion is not the first indication of his direction, and it will not be the last. It is one data point in a pattern that, when viewed from sufficient distance, describes the deliberate construction of a monarchy shaped in William's image, lean, professional, duty-centered, and unapologetically clear about who belongs within its ceremonial core. For Camilla, the personal dimension of all this cannot be separated from the institutional one, and that is what makes her position so genuinely difficult. She is the Queen. That title carries immense symbolic weight and genuine constitutional standing. But she is also a mother watching her daughter be formally excluded from an institution that she herself sits at the head of, and the man responsible for that exclusion is her stepson, a man she has known since he was a child grieving the death of his mother. The emotional complexity of that situation is not something that institutional analysis can fully capture, and it would be a mistake to reduce Camilla's distress to mere political calculation. She is experiencing something that is humanly painful. But the institution, as Charles has effectively communicated through his silence, does not make exceptions for pain. It makes exceptions for duty. And Laura Lopes has not established a claim based on duty. The conversation that this episode is forcing within royal circles goes well beyond the specific question of Laura Lopes' attendance at a single ceremony. It is a conversation about the nature of the modern monarchy itself, about what it is for, who it belongs to, and how it must present itself to a public that is simultaneously more skeptical of inherited privilege and more demanding of genuine public service than at any previous point in the institution's history. William's answer to those questions is clear and consistent. The monarchy exists to serve. It derives its legitimacy from that service. Anyone who represents it publicly must be able to justify their presence through their contribution to that purpose. This is not a radical argument. It is, in many ways, the most traditional argument available. It is the argument that the monarchy has always made about itself at its most serious moments. What is new is the willingness to enforce it firmly, formally, and without the softening concessions that family feeling so often demands. As the Royal Mundus service concluded and the images of a focused, purposeful working monarchy were transmitted around the world, the internal reality of what had just happened continued to ripple through the corridors of the palace. A decision had been made, a precedent had been set, a message had been sent, and crucially, no one had stepped in to reverse it. The king had been silent. The princess royal had been supportive. The courtiers had taken note. And William had demonstrated something that future monarchs must always, at some point, demonstrate, that when they exercise the authority of the crown, that exercise stands. Laura Lopes' name is gone from the list, but the significance of its absence will be present in every comparable decision made from this point forward. That is how institutional power works. That is how precedents function. And that is precisely why William chose this particular way of making this particular move. He is not governing by personality or by drama. He is governing by record, by protocol, and by the patient accumulation of institutional facts. The palace has erupted, yes. But beneath the eruption, the foundations of a new royal order are being quietly and methodically laid, one formal decision at a time. And William, it seems, is just getting started.